think we have a quorum.
No,
Not yet. All right. Well, we're one short of quorum, so can't establish quorum yet.
Nope, we got it. We got
We do have a quorum. Okay, let's establish quorum.
Senator Skinner.
I am here.
Skinner present. Ochoa Bogue.
Here.
Ochoa Bogue present. Blake Spear.
Present.
Blake Spear present. Caballero.
Present.
Caballero present. Cortese.
Here.
Cortese present. Manjavar. Padilla. Ciarto.
Here.
Ciarto present. Umberg. Wahab.
Great. All right. So we've now established quorum, and we'll go with the. We have a number of members here to present who have bills, but we'll go in the order that the measures are listed. So we'll start with item 3, SB 1438, Senator Neal. So you can come to the whatever that's called.
Podium.
Podium. Yes, you can come to the podium. I did say that, didn't I?
Sorry, the podium?
Well, there, that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where he presents.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I did. I said podium. It's okay. Go ahead, Senator Neal.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm here today to present SB 1438, a bill which will provide clarity on how recovery housing can work in conjunction with Housing First. In simpler terms, this is a bill about providing self-sufficiency options, which I believe is a key ingredient in helping people successfully get out of homelessness. Specifically, SB 1438 will help ensure recovery residence models are eligible for funding by clarifying in state housing law that recovery housing is, in fact, allowed under the state's housing first model. The language contained in this bill is consistent with the guidance provided by the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Agency, otherwise known as HUD. And it's my understanding that the language contained in SB 1438 was even collaborated on by some Housing First advocates. HUD's guidance for recovery housing or sober living environment options are to help people have effective housing and services for those with substance abuse disorders. This does not mean Housing First is not in play, but rather gives individuals a choice. Some individuals pursuing recovery from addiction want a choice for an abstinence-free focused residential or housing program where they can be supported by those who are also focused on recovery from addiction. To be clear, this does not dismantle Housing First, because if a person chooses an abstinence-focused or sober living program and relapses, the bill dictates it cannot be an automatic cause for eviction or termination, returning them to the streets. Current funding for a program with an abstinence focus is typically limited to persons exiting incarceration, where a substance-free environment is required to meet post-release orders. But there are many individuals who may voluntarily wish to choose to live in a drug-free housing model and yet are not allowed to select this option. This is particularly difficult for parents who are denied this choice and are seeking a drug-free home for family reunification purposes. This approach puts countless families at risk and potentially pushes children into foster home situations rather than staying with their parents while they seek treatment or are in early recovery after completing treatment for addiction. The clarification of eligibility provided in SB 1438 will help recovery residences access this funding. The measure also includes valuable safeguards, including state oversight, and states that if a recovery residence participant no longer chooses to participate in drug-free living, that person is not penalized or returned to homelessness. expanding clarity on the option of programs that work to help people, and especially parents, become self-sufficient by addressing their addiction issues, get them the services they need, and set them on a path to stability. Now, a point that I've mentioned a few times so far is self-sufficiency. You see, in discussions that we've had about homelessness, since I've been back here in the legislature now for a year, I've rarely heard the term self-sufficiency. I hear shelter, housing, supportive housing, but rarely self-sufficiency. My experience with social service programs dating back over 20 years when I was on the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors is that the goal of social service programs is getting people to self-sufficiency. That is what our goal should be with homelessness, not a roof over their head, not supportive housing, though those are worthy and in fact, indeed necessary steps in a progression, but the progression must lead to self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency is quite simply not possible if a person is still dependent upon drugs or has untreated mental illness. We must be guided by encouraging and more liberally allowing the moving of unhoused addicts and mentally troubled people toward treatment. This proposal is just one way to at least allow choice to those who need a distraction-free option toward their desire to achieve self-sufficiency. Today, the bill sponsor is with me, Sherry Daly, from California Consortium of Addiction Programs and Professionals, as well as Lori Newman, who runs recovery residences in the Merced area for women and children.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and members. Sherry Daly with California.
I don't think that mic's on.
I didn't think so.
Excuse me.
Better? Thank you. Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and members. Sherry Daly with the California Consortium of Addiction Programs and Professionals, representing over 20,000 addiction counselors, more than 100 treatment programs, 350 recovery residences, and thousands of people in recovery throughout our state. Although I typically testify in committee about the amazing benefits that my industry and profession bring to California in reducing the devastating effects of addiction in our state, I unfortunately find myself here this afternoon defending the work we do and the amazing contributions that people in recovery make in our state. Given the somewhat incomplete analysis you have been provided and the disparaging comments made about recovery residences housing put forth by the opposition, I will use my time today to give you a more complete picture with which to assist you to make your decision. The analysis and opposition put forth that there is no standardization or oversight of recovery residences. This statement leaves out important facts. There are national standards for this housing type, as evidenced by the best practices model for recovery housing that was just put out by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. There are national standards supported by a robust field of knowledge that are used in dozens of states, including California. And the recent adoption of the recovery housing in the American Society of Addiction Medicine's ASAM Criteria 4th edition that was just published this winter for the first time includes recovery housing. These documents and published standards rely on decades of academic study. Simply put, if the nation's top doctors in addiction medicine have enshrined recovery housing in their continuum of care, this resource is obviously much more than homes with deplorable living conditions, as advanced by the opposition. The analysis also points out that recovery residences are not regulated. This is true. They are not regulated because they are housing, just like the housing provided under the Housing First umbrella. That is not to say that this housing type cannot meet standards or abide by contracts, just as other providers do. These homes have to abide by the exact same rules as current providers. Currently, people living in incarceration environments are allowed to participate in recovering housing under the program. Obviously, the Interagency Council on Homeless already has a means of ensuring that all of the rules are followed. Additionally, many counties have begun to use some of their very limited block funding to pay for recovery housing. They've been able to create compliance to standards through contract obligations, thus proving that this resource can be adequately overseen by a funding entity. Finally, I would like to close with a brief comment on the effectiveness of recovery housing. There is so much evidence to support the effectiveness of this housing type that Harvard University has a clearinghouse dedicated to it. The Recovery Research Institute, partnered by Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, has compiled literally hundreds of research papers and findings on the efficacy of this housing. I could use the rest of the hearing to go through their findings, but I'll
There's
again,
5 minutes total per, so
understand.
if you want to give your other witness
yes,
some time, you should wrap up.
yes, I will wrap up. Anyhow, the ASAM criteria is created by the most advanced doctors, experts in the world, and they have standardized this type of housing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and members. Lori Newman here as the Executive Director of Community Social Model Advocates, Inc., which operates licensed and certified residential treatment facilities and recovery residence facilities for women and women with children in Merced County who are at risk or are homeless. The properties for both treatment and recovery residence programs were deeded and transferred to the nonprofit corporation from the Federal Health and Human Service Act under Title V. I have a 29-year career and experience working with at-risk or homeless women and women with children who have been experiencing a substance use disorder. I'm here today to give a voice to those who need drug-free options for housing. The best testimony I can give to ensure the members of this committee have enough information to make an informed decision is to tell Ashley's story. Ashley's story is common amongst those who are recovering from a substance use disorder. Ashley was admitted to my program with 3 distinct diagnoses: substance use, alcohol severe, a mental health diagnosis, depression and anxiety, moderate to severe, and a late stage cirrhosis of the liver. Amongst other issues, Ashley arrived at our facility homeless, without her children, and suffering from current traumatic events. Ashley stayed in treatment for 120 days and graduated. Her mental health stabilized, and she was regularly seeing her primary care doctor and specialist for her liver. During the discharge planning process, we determined Ashley lacked any financial resources and would need housing assistance to not be homeless post-discharge. Additionally, Ashley was referred to outpatient services to continue her treatment for substance use disorder and
You
mental.
you have about 30 seconds.
Sadly, within 6 months, Ashley relapsed. And here was what she said when I asked what happened. Lori, when I left here last time, I was fully invested in my recovery and staying sober. I understood that if I drank again, I might die and never see my children again. I had coping skills and I had developed a social support system of sober friends and sponsor. I was hopeful for my future and I thought I could reunite with my children. Unfortunately, the housing program I went to did not require anyone to stay clean and sober. I was constantly surrounded by people who drank and used. I tried to stay sober and did for about 30 days.
You could wrap up.
But being around other people who used, staying sober became impossible. She came back into the program for a second treatment episode and is now residing in a recovery residence, doing well.
Thank you.
Mental health is stable. Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, any other witnesses in support? Any other witnesses in support? All right, so we'll have the witness in opposition and the primary witnesses in opposition. Again, there's 5 minutes total for that, and then we'll add the Me Too's. So if you're sharing between each other, just.
Hello, Scared.
I just called you Scare Chinner. Hello,
Ah.
Chair Skinner and members. My name is Rachel Bogwood, and I'm a legislative advocate at ACLU California Action. The ACLU opposes SB 1438 along with several partner organizations who do housing first and houselessness work across the state. We did oppose this bill as proposed to be amended in our letters, but it was actually amended differently than we anticipated, so I'll speak to that in my testimony here. The stated purpose that you've heard for this bill is not what the bill would do, and the true impacts are very harmful. This bill would endanger California's fidelity to housing first, return formerly unhoused people to the streets, and threaten funding for existing houselessness programs. If SB 1438 was passed, it would make it so that all housing programs for the formerly unhoused or unstably housed could evict someone for the use of alcohol or drugs if children are housed in the same location. A person could be evicted even if they are following all lease conditions and are not disruptive. Opposite to the bill's stated purpose, the language encourages landlords to return formerly unhoused people who use drugs or alcohol to the street. This could be a case of relapse, which is a normal part of recovery, or for recreational use. By singling out households where children are present, this language also invites blatant housing discrimination against a protected class, not to mention how traumatic and disruptive evictions are for children. Further, the vagueness of the terms use of substances and in the same location as if children are housed in the same location could be interpreted to allow landlords in these housing programs to evict any person who had one glass of wine in their home if the housing unit was receiving state funding and is in the same building or complex as a child. This is not what our state should be doing to resolve our houselessness crisis. Even though it was raised to the author's office that the language I just described applied to all housing placements funded by the state houselessness dollars and had broad implications, the amendments to the bill did not clarify this or remove it, which leaves us deeply concerned about the bill's intent. To move on to the amendments, the added new language, SB 1438 would allow counties to take 25% of their limited state-provided houselessness funds away from existing successful housing first programs and give them to organizations and companies running recovery housing or sober housing, who are not applying or not using the general principles, all of them as stated as housing first. The pool of state funding available for houselessness programs is finite, and in this budget year, we know it is not growing. Allowing part of that fixed amount to be siphoned off would necessarily force existing best practice programs to close during an acute crisis. The opposition shared information about the efficacy of recovery housing. It's not a question of what is effective to resolve addiction. It's a question of, these are houselessness dollars, it's a question of what is effective and has the proven stated track record to resolve houselessness. So we urge your no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have about 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Gregory Kramer on behalf of Disability Rights California in regretful opposition to this bill. We'd like to align our comments with those of ACLU, and would just like to add that housing first is the gold standard for getting people housed and staying housed in the state. This legislature has demonstrated serious concern about our neighbors on the street who are using substances, and the data shows that categorically the most effective approaches to end houselessness in California are housing first programs. It's not so much a question of whether there is a potential kind of recovery housing that could be good for someone to live in. It's that sober living and recovery housing just don't have the same demonstrable outcomes of getting and keeping people off of the streets. And the state has no experience or capacity in overseeing these outcomes. We must prioritize our scarce state homelessness funding resources for true housing first models with a proven track record of ending homelessness. And while there are other coalitions, including the Western Center on Law and Poverty and the National Alliance to End Homelessness in opposition, they just asked for me to share their opposition as well. So in conclusion, we just urge you to provide a no vote for this bill. And with a no vote, you can protect children and families from being evicted to the streets, reaffirm your commitment to housing first, and safeguard our existing and effective houselessness programs from being defunded. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, are there any others in opposition who want to come and add on as me too? All right, seeing none, we'll turn to the dais. Comments or questions by colleagues? Yes, Senator Menjivar.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. You know, Senator, I'm not here to argue with the importance of every kind of solution we can bring to the table to address what we're seeing on our streets. You and I have been very passionate in addressing a lot of these behavioral health needs, substance use disorders, and so forth. I agree with what your sponsors have shared regarding the need to really have a lot of these centers open. My concern, and I might be putting my sub-3 sub-chair hat on, is regarding the our oversight over all over the programs that we as a state bring funding to. And I want to share that we already struggle with the oversight of programs that already receive some of our funding in an array of different things. Right now, even in my district, we're having adult centers, places where individuals with developmental disabilities are being taken care of, being abused, and it's been going on for years. And we help fund those entities, and it takes us a while to investigate, to know what's going on. So my big concern with this bill is our lack of oversight over it. I understand that it's been certified under ASAM and everyone with expertise under it, but if we don't have oversight under it, I'm wary as to why we would provide funding to an entity and let them roam free, whether we have, even though we might have more good apples than bad apples. So with that, unfortunately will not be able to vote yes on your bill, given those concerns.
Any other? All right. Did you, Senator Joe?
So I'm actually grateful for this bill, and I'm grateful for this bill because as we currently stand in the state of California, as we've invested in addressing homelessness over $23 billion, the majority of the state and many of our residents within our state are concerned about the fact that the numbers have not actually decreased with regards to homelessness. And yes, homelessness is multifaceted. There's various regards to it. But one of the concerns that we have is the fact that there's no accountability in the current program that we currently have. And because there's no accountability in requiring people to get self-help in order to receive housing, we see a revolving door coming in and out of people having addiction problems, coming in, leaving, and coming back, impacting behavioral health as well. Interestingly enough, I believe it was San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, that came in and said that they would be starting to look into or follow through with requiring assistance or self-help when it comes to behavioral health and opioid addiction. I'm very sympathetic to the fact that we have a lot of individuals that need to have a supportive housing environment in which they can thrive and help build that resistance and be able to be healthy. And I think the more resources and options that we have available for housing to meet the individual's needs, just like in education, not every child learns the same. We have to have different modalities in which we provide the educational content. Just the same, human beings, we're all different. We learn differently. We self-treat differently. I think it's important to have options for people that need that. And it doesn't mean, I don't think that this bill would necessarily create a threat to those programs that are actually effective in providing housing for individuals that need that sort of housing. But I think it would be great to have an additional model for those individuals that can't thrive in what we currently have. And it's our duty as a state, if we're truly trying to address a crisis in our state, to provide as many options and choices for people to choose what's going to help them best in being successful in their self-help journey. And I think with that in mind, I think that, you know, when it comes to providing options, this is the way to go. And another thing, when it comes to oversight, it is our job as members in the legislature to have oversight. But this does have oversight. It has national oversight, maybe not state, but national. And it's something that we could address moving forward as part of the accommodation is, okay, how do we create oversight if we wanted to statewide, in addition to what is already in place nationwide, nationally. So for those purposes, I'll be happy to support this bill today. Thank you for bringing it forward, for bringing options and choices for people to carry on their journey on self-help in housing. And with that, if I'm not a co-author, would love to be added as a co-author. Thank you, Senator.
Are you
Mila.
moving the bill, Senator?
Yes.
All right, Senator Cortese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm certainly interested in hearing your comments before we conclude, if you're going to make some.
I will.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate a couple things I would like to start off with, which is, first of all, the author's presentation over, kind of a methodical presentation over a lot of pieces to this, I guess, for lack of a better word. I also have worked closely with some of the folks in support, mainly because of, 30, 35 years of work legislatively in terms of volunteerism as well with the recovery community. But there are parts of what's being presented here that are alarming to me, so much so that I don't feel like I could support the bill in the shape that it's in right now. One of those being sort of the inherent default to segregation of folks who potentially are in recovery or are in recovery or are trying to stay in recovery. It is not something I view as a good thing. And it's not something I view as a good thing for society to be sort of separated by desire from, I think some of the words that were used were to their own life of residency without distraction. People who are in recovery or trying to stay in recovery or having an issue with substance abuse or alcohol for a period of time, they're not a distraction. They're human beings who are entitled to live in a mainstream society with all the support they can get. That said, where I agree with some of the basic pretense of the bill here, and I'm sure others in the Housing Committee will disagree with me on this, is I don't think that housing first should be ever defined as, cutting short opportunities along the continuum to move people along, into the permanency that we're looking for in terms of housing and a roof over their head. And I think that's been a problem in all the years that I've been working in the housing space. So in short, there's some things I like about what you're trying to do here, sincerely, but there's some things that trouble me so much, mostly from, coming less from the housing first side and more from the side of not having unintended consequences when it comes to folks in recovery. And I don't want to sit here because, time is of the essence in a committee hearing always, and give examples of some of the subjective things that I think might seep into this, the way it's structured right now in terms of people getting pushed out, based on what ultimately would turn into a complaint-driven process. This person is a distraction. This person's a threat to my child, intoxicated. Those are some of the things that I'm not sure how to measure them in a way that would cut short somebody's otherwise basic entitlement to housing and a roof over their head. That said, I'll stop there, Madam Chair, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So I will make my comment, and then I'll ask for Senator Nilo to close. We have nothing in statute that prohibits a recovery facility from being sober only. What we have in statute is Housing First for programs that the state provides funding to. And as we know, the state, while we are trying to put additional funding towards this problem of our unhoused people, we in no way, regardless of how much people think we have put forward to date, it is not even equivalent to what the need is. So we are not funding every facility, whether shelter, recovery, you name it, we are not funding all of them. And so, but we have, through the adoption of Housing First, made a policy that state funding will go towards those programs that embrace and in the Housing First concept. And so in that respect, I feel the bill is too broad. It undermines that, and it allows for eviction of even families with children, or a facility where there is children, if somebody is not sober. So from that respect, it is too broad. And I just wanted to make that clarification about there's nothing in statute that says a recovery housing facility in the state of California cannot require a sober living. It's just that the state, we would not provide that funding in terms of our Housing First policy. So that is why I will be voting no on the bill. And Senator Nilo, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few things. First of all, I am perfectly willing to further discuss issues that cause concern to see if the bill can be amended to satisfy those concerns, such as oversight and the like. But I understand that there's nothing in the law that prevents this option, but practically it is, because the people that would choose this option and would need this option, they can't afford to pay for it. And that means it would have to be a nonprofit program, totally privately funded, of which there are a few, such as the St. John's program locally here, which doesn't receive public funding for its fundamental program, but it has tremendous success and it requires sobriety. And it isn't only with regard to children. Now, under Housing First, if there are children present and people are using or drinking, they're not going to be ejected because there are children there. And I'm not, while I don't approve of that, I'm not here proposing that. It is not only for parents attempting to keep their kids. It's for anyone that wants to pursue a clean lifestyle environment, get to self-sufficiency, which they can't as long as they're addicted, be in a program where they aren't provided the distraction of other people using amidst them. Now, that point, distraction, that was perceived by Senator Cortese to be somehow a segregation. And I guess you could call it that in the sense that people have chosen to be in an environment where they are attempting to recover, and the distraction of other people using in front of them is a negative influence on their attempt to recover. I want to emphasize again that this is a choice. Senator Ochoa Bogue used the term self-help. These are people that want to help themselves in a clean environment to get clean. And sometimes that, as my witness testified, sometimes that's difficult, maybe even literally impossible to recover from a severe addiction when you have somebody next to you either drinking or using at the same time. So I want to emphasize it's a choice. Now, in terms of homelessness generally, in the analysis, it was cited that Housing First was adopted by the Bush administration, and through 2016 nationally saw a 27% reduction in homelessness. That's true, but it stopped at 2016. In California, since 2016, homelessness has increased by about 90%. increased. It would seem to me with that kind of explosive increase that we'd want to try perhaps some other things, or at least options to try other things. Because again, I want to emphasize, at least in my opinion, the objective of homeless programs, the end goal, the focus has to be self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency cannot happen if an individual continues to be addicted to drugs or has untreated mental illness. Self-sufficiency. So I respectfully request an aye vote.
All right, we have a motion. We'll do a roll call.
This is SB 1438 by Senator Nilo. The motion is due pass and refer to the Committee on Judiciary. Senator Skinner.
No.
Skinner, no. Ochoa-Bogue.
Aye.
Ochoa-Bogue, aye. Blakespear. No. Blakespear, no. Caballero. Cortezi. Cortezi, no. Menjivar.
No.
Menjivar, no. Padilla.
No.
Padilla, no. Sarto.
Aye.
Sarto, aye. Umberg, Wahab.
We'll put the bill on call. It's 2 to 5 right now, but we will put it on call.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we will now go to Senator McGuire. And this is item number 1, SB 1187.
All right, let's try this again. There we go. Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for your work. I want to say thank you to your committee's staff for their excellent analysis of the bill. Truly grateful, Madam Chair, and it's always good to see you. Thank you so much for allowing me to present. For many who have been on this committee, this bill may sound familiar to each of you. We've reintroduced SB 18 from last session because of the acute housing crisis that exists in Native American communities up and down the Golden State. And let's be clear, this bill received bipartisan support because this is an issue that impacts every corner of California. We'd like to talk about some of the facts that face Native American communities. Here's what we know. Native Americans in California are disproportionately represented among the state's homeless population and have higher rates of poverty, overcrowded and substandard homes. That's compared to any other population here in the Golden State. The rate of tribal poverty is more than twice that in the rest of California's population. And what we know is homelessness among indigenous people is up to double that of the general population. And one third of tribal residents live below the federal poverty rate. And despite the clear need, the overwhelming majority of tribes are unable to access existing state housing programs because often these programs are too restrictive for tribes to be able to meet the threshold and compliance requirements, or they are mismatched to the needs that exist on tribal land and in communities. Not to mention, many state housing programs conflict with tribal sovereignty. And even when there is one-time dedicated money for tribes within these programs, it often actually goes unspent or significantly delayed in regards to disbursement. Here's a statistic from the Housing and Community Development. In 2019, in an effort to be able to address these issues, this legislature adopted AB 1010, and it made tribes eligible for most of California housing programs. Even with that bill passing, out of the 109 tribes that proudly call California home, only 30 have been awarded state funds. So let's be clear, we know that the current programs do not fit tribal needs. SB 1187 would address these challenges by creating a new and separate housing program for tribes specific to tribal needs, which would be created in consultation with tribes and tribal leaders. This is very similar to what we already do for farm worker housing, where the Joe Cerna Farm Worker Housing Grant Program is designated exclusively to address the housing need of agricultural workers here in the Golden State. This bill is going to support the construction of new homes and the renovation of existing ones in tribal communities who have the greatest need. And simply put, 1187 is a housing program designed by tribes 4 tribes and would respectfully ask for an aye vote. And Madam Chair, I'm really grateful that we have Joseph James, one of the hardest working tribal leaders in the country with us today, chairman of the Yurok tribe, and Mariah McGill. And I just want to say thank you so much to Ms. McGill for sticking with us and for all of her work. She is with the Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority, and both have a few items to say, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Whichever one wants to start, and
Yeah.
we allow 5 minutes for the, you share it.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name's Joseph James. I'm chairman of the Yurok tribe. I come from the village of Shregon, located on the lower Klamath River. I'm here to talk about the importance and support for SB 1187. I'm here to advocate, which would create the first ever dedicated tribal housing grant program in California to address the homeless issues confronting our Native communities. California has the largest and most diverse Native population in the country, with over 109 U.S. federally recognized tribe, housing huge crisis for our people. As a tribal chairman, as I mentioned, housing is a crisis for us. I'm also leading with my fellow brother and sister out California, our MMIP. This is all tied, intertwined with each other. You need housing. When we go and find our murder missing people, housing is a critical component of it. I just wanted to address that. Many tribes have long waiting lists for new homes. Many families will never have access to a home, given the current low level of funding for affordable housing on tribal land. As a result, thousands of tribal households are afraid to live in overcrowded and substandard housing. SB 1187 fixes by contracts has been designed by tribes and driven by tribes, for tribes. It'll provide a flexible, comprehensive funding source. It is a program that will address the state standards, actual collaboration with the tribes, and address housing and homeless in our communities, which include all people, Native and non-Native people. Again, in closing, I'm here to support 1187. We have an opportunity here to have a tribal housing program to be driven by tribal people with our support and legislators. And again, we're doing a lot of great things here in the state of California. Here's one that could help us in real time to address the many issues that are facing Indian country here in California. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Mariah McGill and I work with Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority. We're a tribal designated housing entity that carries out housing and homelessness services on behalf of 9 federally recognized tribes in Northern California. In my 10 years at Northern Circle, we've been successful in being awarded a home investment partnership program grant for $920,000 through the state of California. It took 5 years to get a standard agreement. And today we still have no houses built and 4 chronically homeless households who are still living in storage containers, in hotels, and in their vehicles waiting for a house. That's at HCD. So we have, of the 9 tribes that we represent, there's over 6,000 tribal members. And we have a housing shortage for low-income families of 2,111 households. Just to build the housing alone, it'll cost $1.2 billion. Now, if you've ever been to tribal lands, you'll know that we have limited space, limited access to resources such as infrastructure, and that $1.2 billion does not include acquisition of developable land, nor does it count those dollars necessary for water, sewer, and electricity. This 1187 means so much to us, because we have tribal members living in storage containers. We have tribal members that have died on our waiting lists. We have tribal members living in hotels. And they are this state's first homeless population. Let that sink in. This grant program is by tribes, for tribes. And it would really mean a lot to many, many people in this great state. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Let's see if there's any other witnesses in the room who want to add me too.
Good afternoon, Alex Alanese on behalf of the Hablominal Pomo of Upper Lake and the Cahuilla tribe in support.
Good afternoon, Catherine Charles on behalf of Housing California in support.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Galen Dobbins for the California Coalition for Rural Housing in strong support.
Rachel Muller on behalf of the California Coalition for Community Investment and the Rural Community Assistance Corporation in strong support. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair and members, Chris Lindstrom with the California Tribal Business Alliance in strong support. Thank you.
Andrew Dawson, the California Housing Partnership in support.
Madam Chair and members, Gregory Kramer on behalf of Disability Rights California in support.
Great. All right, let's see if there's any witnesses in opposition. Seeing none, let me bring it to the dais. Anyone have any comments or? Go ahead, Senator Padilla. We have a motion. Who said down here, move it? Senator Sayarto. Okay, Sayarto's moved. Senator Padilla, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Madam Chair, thanks. And members, just to extend my gratitude to the Pro Tem for your obvious persistence in this space and getting us to a place where there could be a programmatic framework that would ensure a greater amount of state support for housing and sovereign places that are often overlooked. So I really appreciate the persistence, and looking at the history here, it's pretty obvious that's what it's taken. So I'm happy to be supportive.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Great. Any other comments? All right. Senator McGuire, would you like to close?
Again, Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Senator Padilla, and would respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Great. So we do have that motion, and we'll do a roll call. The motion is send to appropriations, to pass to appropriations committee.
Senator Skinner.
Aye.
Skinner, aye. Ochoa Bogue.
Aye.
Ochoa Bogue, aye. Blake Spear.
Aye.
Blake Spear, aye. Caballero. Cortezi.
Aye.
Cortezi, aye. Menjivar.
Aye.
Menjivar, aye. Padilla.
Aye.
Padilla, aye. Ciarto. Ciarto, aye. Amberg. Wahab.
All right, we'll keep the bill on call.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So
Thank you so much.
got some absent members. Thank you all. Thank you. All right, so Senator Archuleta, I know you're dying to do it, but Mr. Bradford is first, and he's in the room. Apologies. He snuck in. Really. Go ahead, Senator Bradford. SB 1007, item 2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I'm here to present SB 1007. This bill is a recommendation from the California Reparations Task Force, a task force that I spent the last 2 years of my life on. And these are suggestions from the final report upon appropriations provide financial aid and assistance to descendants of enslaved persons for the purpose of purchasing, owning, or maintaining a home. This can be done through subsidizing mortgage payments, homeowners assistance, insurance, I should say, and any other means to assist descendants with owning and maintaining a home. SB 1007 is about starting a long process of paying back a debt that's not only owed, that is promised, and 160 years overdue to African Americans. It is the first step in closing the wealth and equity gap created by centuries of slavery and racial discriminatory policies. Even after the abolishment of slavery, federal, state, and local laws enabled racially discriminatory practices that segregated Black Americans from the rest of society. Practices like redlining, discriminatory zoning, racially restrictive housing covenants, and even outright prohibitions. To this day, descendants of enslaved persons still feel the effects of these policies. There are many African American families who have descendants who have been here for over 160 years who have never owned property in the state of California or anywhere in this country. The Reparations Task Force final report documents that statewide, a typical Black-owned home is 22% less value than a white-owned family's property. And we've seen just recently what happened in the Bay Area when we had an activity called whitewashing, where a African-American had their home appraised at almost 50% less than their white neighbors until they removed any remnants of being an African-American home and had a white person come in and act as if they were the homeowners, and the appraisal went up by almost $500,000. So Statewide, African Americans again make up 6% of the population, but 40% of the unhoused population. In major cities like Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego, and San Jose, there are gaps ranging between 20% to 57% between the rates of white home ownership compared to black home ownership. In these same cities, the value of the home is formerly red-lined neighborhoods compared to green-line neighborhoods have gaps ranging from 50% to 125% in pricing differences. These large disparities and equity, I should say, show in plain numbers the ongoing damage caused by racially discriminatory housing policies, and a clear fix is needed. This bill is the beginning of that. I want to thank you for allowing me this testimony, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much, Senator Bradford. We're going to see if you have any main witness in support.
I don't think we have witnesses, but I don't think maybe.
Okay, so witnesses in support who want to just come up to the and indicate your support, and then we'll see if there's any in opposition. Meanwhile, I'm going to hand the gavel to the vice chair while I go and present a bill in another committee. But you go ahead.
Andrew Dawson, the California Housing Partnership, in support.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Stephanie Roberson on behalf of the Bay Area Regional Health and Equities Initiative, also known as BARHI, and the coalition is also supported by 12 other organizations that represent the coalition organizations for reparations, also in support. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chris Larson, Coalition for Just and Equitable California. Also on behalf of the American Redress Coalition of California, Sacramento, American Redress Coalition of California, Bay Area, the Lineage Equity and Advancement Project out of LA, and the California Black Lineage Society, all in strong support.
Madam Chair and members, Gregory Kramer on behalf of Disability Rights California, in support.
Hello, Rachel Bogwit, ACLU California Action, in support.
Hello, Adam Briones, California Community Builders, in strong support.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other witnesses in support of SB 1007? Seeing none, we'll now move on to any witnesses in opposition to SB 1007 here in room 1200. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the dais. Senator Cortese.
Thank you. Just a comment, if I may, to the author. I just wanted to commend you for the portion of this bill that is getting beyond the indices of past harm, past the harm caused by slavery, as we in law school and other places learned as the problem that we need to correct with whatever programs that we have available in looking at the ongoing redlining that's going on. I think that's a major shift here in public policy for the state of California that you've embedded, in the intent behind the bill. And I just wanted to acknowledge you for that. Sort of try to do my part to help elevate what you're saying in your own testimony about the bill. Thank you. And I'll be supportive.
All right, Senator Padilla. Okay, we have a motion to move. Any other comments from our dais? Seeing none. Madam Secretary, please call the roll. Yes, I'm sorry. Senator Bradford, would you like
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank the colleagues on this committee and thank Senator Cortese for his comments. And as stated, I spent 2 years of my life on the Reparations Task Force, and the final report had 115 recommendations on how we could start curing the harms of slavery, the vestiges of slavery that still exist today. This was just one of 115 suggestions, but really at the core, what really needs to do. As we all know, the promise of 40 acres in the mural really never materialized, but reparations has always been about land. And this helps individuals who have never owned property or who have owned property but have had their property redlined or undervalued and hold on to this property. So I look forward to an aye vote on this measure. Thank you.
This is SB 1007 by Senator Bradford. The motion is do pass and refer the Committee on Appropriations. Senator Skinner. Lachobog. Blakespear.
Aye.
Blakespear, aye. Caballero. Cortezi.
Aye.
Cortezi, aye. Menjivar.
Aye.
Menjivar, aye. Padilla.
Aye.
Padilla, aye. Ciarto. Amberg. Wahab. That's 4-0. We'll put it on call.
That's 4-0, and we'll leave that on call for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And then we can go to
Senator Archuleta. Welcome. You'll be presenting SB 1465.
Good.
Please begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you, members, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to first off by saying and accepting the amendments outlined in the committee analysis, and thank the chair for her assistance in working with my office and going forward with this bill. I really appreciate that. Her time and effort really paid off. Today, I'm presenting Senate Bill 1465, which allows any structure used for human habitation to be declared a substandard building, regardless of zoning or approved use of the building. Senate Bill 1465 also makes changes to code enforcement procedures to extend tenant protections to buildings not zoned residential but are being used for housing. California state housing laws are some of the strongest in the nation, establishing criteria for health and safety protections through building standards to ensure decent, safe, and sanitary housing for all Californians. California is experiencing a housing shortage of significant proportions, particularly in the affordable housing sector. Individuals and families unable to find affordable housing may resort to living in buildings that have not been zoned residential. Current law provides protections for residents that live in a dwelling that is not up to code and puts the resident or the public in harm's way. However, there's ambiguity in the law about whether these protections apply to buildings not residentially zoned, even if they are being inhabited by tenants. Despite being rented as housing, many warehouses, factories, and even buildings that are not in residential zones and have been evaded by much needed safety inspections and code enforcement. And that's the problem. They're evading the needed safety inspections and code enforcement. Tenants in these buildings are among the most disadvantaged renters in California. They do not control or may not even know the zoning in the building they reside in. Substandard conditions and their associated dangers for tenants do not cease to exist just because of their building zoning. We need to empower local and state agencies to better deal with dilapidated commercial and industrial buildings being used as housing. This bill has no opposition and truly is a nonpartisan tenant protection bill. And with me today to testify are Faith Borges and Larry Brooks on behalf of the California Association of Code Enforcement. And I respectfully ask for your aye vote, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator Archuleta, and welcome. Please state your name and proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Senator Archuleta, and thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Faith Borges with Actum, and I'm here today proudly representing the California Association of Code Enforcement Officers. I have with me here today Mr. Brooks, who is a code enforcement officer, a KCO board member, and the current director of Alameda County Healthy Homes Department, headquartered in Oakland, and previously managed code enforcement programs in Sacramento County and Yolo County. He's available to answer any technical questions. I'm here to testify in support of SB 1465, which will allow existing inspections for code enforcement to be applied to any structure that's used for human habitation, regardless of the building's zoning or approved use. SB 1465 additionally applies habitability and landlord-tenant protections to these properties, ensuring that tenants have access to vital resources such as relocation assistance and retaliation protections for raising habitability complaints. Californians who have been driven into warehouses or sheds and other unpermitted residences by California's housing crisis are currently cut off from resources available to tenants in buildings properly zoned for housing. Thanks to the work of many of the legislators on this committee and stakeholders in this room, Californians California's inspections and tenant protection laws are among the strongest in the nation, and yet these protections still exclude many of the state's most vulnerable tenants. Tenants do not determine whether the building that they are living in is zoned and used properly. Californians should not be punished for resorting to living in makeshift, unapproved housing units due to the state's housing crisis. A lack of affordable housing is the crisis of a generation, and while there are many points that we can make on that at the macro scale, we'd like to take a moment to share the impact of the consequences of treating unsafe housing as a substitute for affordable housing. This week, I spoke with a grieving mother who lost her daughter in the Ghost Ship fire on December 2nd in 2016. Out of respect for her privacy, we'll keep her identity anonymous. However, we have her permission to relay the following. My daughter was a vibrant soul who loved her community in Oakland. She was one of 36 people who passed away in the preventable fire at the Ghost Ship warehouse. Following her death, I toured the dilapidated warehouse and saw the alarming conditions that people were living in. I cannot tell you how difficult it is to know that that is where my daughter died. I don't wish to attack any of the residents of the warehouse or anyone who finds themselves living in these heartbreaking conditions, but I do urge the committee to support this legislation and other efforts to protect people who find themselves living in unsafe conditions like those of the (1465) empowers local governments to deal with dilapidated commercial and industrial buildings used as housing to prevent future tragedies like the Ghost Ship fire, or as noted in the committee analysis, like the shootings in Half Moon Bay. For these reasons and more, we urge your aye vote today.
Thank you very much, Faith. Sir? Next. Please state your name and proceed when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, honorable committee members. Larry Brooks, Director of Alameda County Healthy Homes Department, member of the Board of Directors for the California Association of Code Enforcement Officers. And I simply urge your aye vote on this bill. Help us to help others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brook. Do we have any witnesses in support of SB 1465 here in room 1200?
Madam Chair and members, Anthony Molina on behalf of Andrew Mendoza from the California Building Officials in support. Andrew's currently at jury duty today, so he asked me to give his testimony in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other witnesses in support of SB 1465? Seeing none, we'll turn to any witnesses in opposition to SB 1465. Seeing none, do we have anyone here in the room in opposition? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the dais. Any questions and comments? Senator Blakesfield?
Yes, thank you. I very much appreciate you attempting to address the tragedy of the Ghost Ship fire and the story of the mother and touring that. It's really heartbreaking to hear those stories and remember that tragedy. And it's really important that we do something about it. I think the thing that I'm preoccupied by, and I'd just like to ask if you might address it, is that what your bill does is it allows that any structure that's being used as housing be declared substandard. And then a series of things would start to unfold. And I'm concerned about people becoming homeless because, for example, in commercial and industrial areas, a number of buildings have kitchens and they have places for people to rest. And it's possible that people are living in those places, maybe not at density and scale, but just here and there. And that there would be some, they're doing that because they need housing, and whatever their life circumstances are have resulted in them needing to stay in that environment and wanting to. And so I'm concerned about the neighbor turning in their neighbor, because this is the type of code enforcement that you have a lot with accessory dwelling units. It's the neighbor turns it in the person who doesn't like the parking or they don't like the noise or whatever. And so then that person who's living there in that industrial or commercial space ends up homeless because the landlord basically kicks them out and gets involved in this neighbor dispute. So I wonder if you could just address that. How are we preventing instead of people living inside of these places that maybe they don't meet code because the ceiling's not high enough, or things aren't up to code. I mean, almost immediately things aren't up to code once they're built, because the code is always being modified and changing, and we have all sorts of things that are related to energy efficiency and things that aren't really necessarily critical to health and safety. And it's better that someone's living inside in an apartment or a space than that they're living outside in a tent. So I'd just like to hear about how that's being addressed.
Well, thank you, Senator, for your comments. And I think we all have to understand everything we've heard today has to do with housing and helping people and so on. And what happens is we have to be proactive. So the perfect scenario would be that the city is notified that this building that has, 30,000 square feet, I'm going to convert it into residential. That would be perfect. So then the owner would maybe get the inspector and an architect and say, how do we subdivide this and give it adequate everything, right? That would be the perfect scenario. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is people will either occupy the building, or the homeowner or the building owner will allow people to come in. And yes, that call should be made. And maybe if someone would have made that call, we wouldn't hear that story. And that's what I'm trying to prevent, any tragedy from happening, and to protect people and to make it equitable. Now, remember, these are not long-term housing that we're talking about. We're talking about temporary. We're talking about housing that, God willing, is around the corner, that will be happening because of substance abuse, mental abuse, whatever. And we're all trying to put them into these permanent housing. So some of these things are just temporary. But in that location, you'll find that maybe things are off. So the code enforcement people will be able to come in and take care of some of these things that may be substantial to health and safety. And that's all it does. It opens a door for the code enforcement officers to go in, work with the builder, homeowner, whoever it might be, the building owner, and try to make it as safe as possible for the term that it looks like the tenants will be there. Because they will be tenants and they do have rights, and they should be treated with dignity. And if there's an issue, here's the other thing. That assuming there's a problem in a quarter of the building, well, the 3/4 are still workable. So they're going to continue to use that, but the building owner will take care of that 1/4 that needs some renovation of some sort. So it's a win-win when we're talking about tenant protection and being the human beings that we should be, to try to protect everyone. And just because they're in a dire straits, that doesn't mean we have to push them aside and ignore them. I think we should step forward and do what we can to help them. And that's the spirit of the bill.
Right. I appreciate the spirit of the bill. I guess your answer, I didn't exactly hear that it was responsive to my question about homelessness prevention. I wonder if the sponsors might want to help address that. That's really, I understand there are lots of great things happening with the bill, but my specific question is about this bill driving more homelessness. So maybe that could be addressed.
Thank you for that good question. This bill specific to substandard housing, and we're not talking about, because there can be many reasons a building could be declared substandard. I think your concern is when you're talking about a red tag situation where people are being evicted from a building because it's so unsafe. And we went through a lengthy exercise with the committee to make sure that that's not happening frequently. In fact, most red tag buildings are for where there's a fire that's occurred, where obviously you cannot permit people to go back inside for structural reasons. Code enforcement is done with a compliance-based emphasis. We just want, if there's mold, for the mold to be taken out. If there's bad wiring that's, could cause a fire, for that to be remedied. It's a lot of steps that would occur before you would see a red tag situation. And in fact, under current law, the concern is that if one of these unpermitted housing buildings is used, what happens is right now the tenant would become homeless because they have no tenant protection, because the landlord could then say at that time, this is not a housing situation, these tenant protections don't apply here. Then that individual who was first harmed by being in an unsafe situation is now doubly harmed with no ability to be protected by any of the fantastic laws that we have in California. So this is actually hoping to step in that situation where there has been harm to the individual twice. And we're doing so for the benefit of the community. We've been working very closely with our friends at the Apartment Association, with realtors, to make sure that we're not inadvertently looping in good landlords who may not know that someone's in their building. And we've worked all of that out. Our concerns have been there's no concern there. We're talking about a specific instance where a landlord is taking advantage of somebody knowing they're in unsafe conditions and that they can't report them because the only thing that could happen to that individual if the situation is so bad is that then they're homeless. So this bill, in fact, would prevent the concern that you're speaking to.
And
Okay,
Senator,
thank you.
may
I
I
appreciate
add?
that answer. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I appreciate that answer, and I feel that was responsive to my concern. So thank you.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to point out that the red tag, I didn't even mention that. If the building's red tag, nobody should be in there, period. So this is just trying to make sure that we take care of as many people as we can. So I respectfully ask your vote.
Do you have any, Senator Padilla?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I appreciate the valuable discussion and the points raised by my esteemed colleague. And I would just say, I think it's pretty clear that it's sort of an inverse way to extend protections both on tenancy that would not typically apply here, but also for hazards and nuisance and other things. I think the author's intent here is addressing situations where folks who are in inappropriately zoned or substandard housing facilities, or I would use that term loosely, structures, I'll use that term, may in fact be in as equal or greater risk or hazard from a health and safety standpoint that they would be were they completely unsheltered. And I'm trying to get at those cases. Also, I think it's important to think about the fact that in some of these scenarios, there is knowledge on the part of the property owner and there's exploitation involved based on the fact that they know that these protections don't extend to housing that is being utilized, structures that are being utilized for housing that are in fact not zoned as such. So I think I know where you're trying to go. I would just encourage you, Senator, to try to continue to work to sharpen the language to draw that distinction. But I do support where you're trying to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions and comments? All right, I just have, I think for me, it's just clarification. I'm supportive of the bill, but I am just clarification. I know that you folks were trying to address the problem with warehouses and factory spaces being used for residential purposes. When the code enforcement comes in, would that require the owners of the properties to, say, upgrade the buildings to a housing level of residence? On that end, what is the level of requirement or responsibility by the landlord, especially if they have people living in those warehouses or warehouses, or what's the other one?
Shipping containers,
Yeah.
or loosely defined structures is what the bill applies to. And thank you for that good question as well. We were specific that there are several instances. You, again, may have an instance that originally other stakeholders were concerned. You may have someone trespassing on property and they didn't want to, then have to rehab a building that they were never intending to be used as housing. So we have clarification language within the bill that code enforcement isn't moving forward with any enforcement, including any updates if the landlord is declaring that that person shouldn't be there. There's usually an ability to, follow a trail and say this is actually a tenant, a lawful tenant, if you will, that's occupying the place. The question at hand specifically was about if there's
whether or not
when
the
there's
level
updates.
of responsibility by the landlords, if they own warehouses and or what's the other one? Sorry.
You restored my train of thought. I think I got you.
Factory spaces. So,
Yes.
obviously not dwelling areas. So if the people are found to be living in those areas, would the landlord be required to convert those areas into actual residential fit caliber of buildings?
For purposes of the bill dealing with substandard things, so things that are talking about, rodent infestations or black mold or things that are unsafe, a sagging building. Compliance is the goal, to work with the landlord to be able to reach compliance to make sure that that building is safe. But if it is, completely unsafe, like we saw with the Ghost Ship fire, where there were so many people living there that they were, running extension cords through walls and drilling holes to try to, get electricity somewhere. They're not proper lavatories or heating, things of that nature. Buildings were never conceived that way. We would be trying to bring that into compliance.
So I guess more clarity on that. If the buildings are zoned for, say, warehouses or factory spaces, they would be responsible for bringing that building up to code to the standard of warehouses and factories, not necessarily to a residential level of standards of living.
If they wanted to use the building as housing, and Mr. Brooks can speak to this, my understanding is then we would be wanting to enforce housing standards. Again, things like proper lavatories, heating, cooling, those things that we have in place for laws for good reason for that. But most landlords are not wanting to rent out commercial spaces right now as housing. The ones that are typically doing it are doing so in a fashion that's exploiting people who that's all that they can afford and not providing any of those basic things that we require, again, like heating or making sure there's no infestations in order to live there. And I think to kind of speak to the point of the question, because code enforcement is largely complaint based, oftentimes if somebody was living in a warehouse, because that was what they could afford, they would not call code enforcement on themselves. Most people, when they have a challenge that is substandard, talking to the premise of the bill, they plug in their outlets, and every time they do, there's sparks flying. Typically, a person reaches out to their landlord. That's the engagement that happens. The landlord engages with the tenant. If a landlord is completely refusing to address something that the tenant has said, is making them feel unsafe, so you're talking about usually pretty harsh living realities, then code enforcement is typically where we're called in at that time, because the tenant has had no luck with the landlord addressing their safety concerns. But if it was this type of a circumstance where someone knows this is what they can afford, there just isn't even the resources for code enforcement to be going around, to every building. It's really in those circumstances where it's elevated, where someone feels that their safety or the safety of their children is at risk continuing to live there.
And I think the most important part, I think that you just mentioned to highlight the difference, is the fact that you are, this would require more responsibility if if a building owner is knowingly leasing the space that is not deemed residential, to be responsible to bringing it up to code to that standard. But if people are just, say, squatting in those buildings, and the owner is not intending that to be used or leased, then they would just be required to put it up to code to the standards of the warehouse and the.
If there was a property owner who had someone who was squatting in their building, code enforcement wouldn't be involved at all. This bill doesn't trigger then. Yeah. That's a situation where you have an issue of trespassing. They would be engaging with law enforcement at that point. So they're different circumstances.
Very, very well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
And I may add, Madam Chair, that the perfect scenario, and this is what we're trying to do, as close to it as we can, the landlord, property owner would be notified, and he would walk through the building with the inspector and with the understanding of public safety and sanitary conditions, because they're going to be temporary. So we don't expect them to remodel it, but just make it safe and sanitary, and it conforms as much as possible within the law. And if we can do that, we can keep the tenants safe until other agencies take over and move them.
Good bill.
Okay? And with that, I ask for your aye vote.
All right. We've got a motion.
I'll move it.
Okay. So we have a motion. It's to pass as amended to Judiciary Committee. We'll do a roll call.
Senator Skinner.
Aye.
Skinner, aye. Ochoa Bogue.
Aye.
Ochoa Bogue, aye. Blake Spear. Caballero. Caballero, aye. Cortezi.
Aye.
Cortezi, aye. Manjavar. Padilla.
Aye.
Padilla, aye. Cerrato. Umberg. Wahab. That's 5-0 on call.
All right. The bill right now is 5-0. We'll keep it on call for our missing members, and we will go to, thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam
Archuleta.
Chair.
And we will go to item 6, SB 1123, Senator Caballero.
You get to sit in the gallery.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. I'm pleased to present SB 1123, which builds on work that I did last year to streamline the process for communities to build small-scale, more affordable infill homeownership projects. The high cost of housing construction and the regulatory delay has contributed to the state's affordability crisis, because supply is just not keeping up with demand. This construction gridlock continues to drive up housing costs and drive down California's homeownership rates. And Madam Chair, you spoke eloquently about this in another committee today. We're all looking for solutions to be able to solve or at least reduce the affordability issue. This affordability crisis has become so extreme that homes now cost more than 8.5 times the average family's salary versus only 2.5 times in the early 1970s. Just like housing affordability has driven homeownership rates down for communities of color,
SB 490,
local
introduced
planning
by
rules have also
Senator
created
Stephen
barriers
Bradford, is the first legislation that will create the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency.
The CAFA agency is a recommendation from the California Reparations Task Force final report.
Possible offices within the agency could include genealogy, strategic communications, data research collection,
as well as general counsel with social services and family affairs.
Tell your representative to support the upcoming 2024 reparations legislation.
Find them at findyourrep.legislature.ca.gov.